The morning sun filtered gently through the large windows of Harvard's lecture hall, casting golden lines across the polished wooden desks. Students shuffled into their seats, carrying books, laptops, and notebooks, their voices mixing into a soft buzz of excitement. It was not just an ordinary class day, it was the day when one of Harvard's most respected professors, Dr. Henry Carleton, would deliver a special lecture. Known for his sharp mind and strong personality, Dr. Carleton had a reputation that stretched far beyond the campus walls. His students admired him, feared him, and sometimes even envied his confidence. To many, listening to him was like being in the presence of brilliance itself. The lecture hall slowly filled until almost every seat was taken. In the back row, a few students whispered about how challenging Dr. Carleton's lectures could be. In the front, others sat upright, ready to take down every word he said, hoping to capture a piece of his wisdom. Among the sea of young, eager faces was one figure who stood out. She was an old woman, sitting quietly in the middle rows. Her dress was plain, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her face carried the gentle lines of age. She didn't seem like a parent visiting her child's class or a staff member who had wandered in. She looked completely at home, as if she had every right to be there, though she seemed far older than anyone else in the room. Some students noticed her and exchanged curious glances. What was she doing there? Was she lost? Did she mistake the room for a public event? But she sat so calmly, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes scanning the large blackboard at the front as though she was waiting for the lecture to begin like everyone else. She seemed neither nervous nor out of place, which made her presence even more puzzling. When Dr. Carleton entered, the room fell silent almost instantly. His tall figure, dressed in a crisp suit, commanded attention. He carried a stack of notes, though everyone knew he rarely needed them. His memory was sharp, and his way of speaking made students feel like they were not just learning but being challenged to think beyond what they believed they could. As he set his notes on the podium, his eyes swept across the room. He always liked to see who was present, who was missing, and who was paying attention. That's when his gaze paused. He noticed her. The old woman sitting quietly among the students. For a second, his eyes narrowed, then a small smirk played at the corner of his lips. He was not used to surprises in his classroom. Students, yes. Occasionally a guest or visitor, perhaps. But an elderly woman in his audience. That was something new. He wondered if she had wandered in out of curiosity, thinking it was some open lecture for the public. Or perhaps she was simply lonely and wanted to spend her morning listening to young people talk about things she couldn't possibly understand. The thought amused him, and he tucked it away in his mind, planning to use it later to his advantage. As the lecture began, Dr. Carleton spoke with his usual authority. He wrote complicated equations on the board, drawing sharp lines of chalk that echoed in the quiet room. He explained theories that many of his students struggled to keep up with, but his tone was confident, almost theatrical. He loved the way the students looked at him, hanging on to his words. To him, knowledge was not just about teaching, it was also about performance. He liked to be admired, respected, and, in some ways, feared. Every now and then, his eyes flickered back to the old woman. She was listening intently, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. Unlike the students who scribbled notes in a rush or looked lost when the concepts became heavy, she simply sat still. She didn't frown in confusion or smile in admiration. She simply absorbed everything with quiet patience, as though she had heard it all before. This unsettled him slightly. He wasn't used to being looked at with such calmness. It almost felt as if she was studying him instead of the other way around. In his mind, he began to shape a plan. He would ask her something. Something so complex that no ordinary person could answer. Something that would remind the class that knowledge belonged to those who had earned it through years of hard work and study, like him. The thought of her fumbling in front of the students amused him. It would not only entertain the class but also strengthen his role as the one who held the keys to knowledge in that room. But for now, he continued his lecture. He spoke about abstract concepts, theories that required not just memorization but deep understanding. His voice grew stronger as he paced back and forth, his hands moving with energy, chalk dust gathering on his fingertips. The students struggled but followed along as best as they could. In the middle of this, the old woman remained his silent puzzle. Who was she? Why was she there? And most importantly, what gave her the confidence to sit among some of the brightest young minds in the country as if she truly belonged? Some students began whispering again, sneaking glances at her when they thought no one was watching. They, too, were curious. But she never reacted. She didn't look at them, didn't fidget, didn't try to explain her presence. She simply remained a quiet, steady presence, almost invisible except for the fact that she was so unusual in that setting. As the first part of the lecture came to an end, Dr. Carlton leaned against the desk at the front, his eyes shining with a mix of pride and amusement. He loved these moments: the silence before he asked a question, the anticipation of who would dare to answer, the small victories when he cornered someone into admitting they didn't know. Today, however, he had someone very specific in mind. He glanced once more at the old woman, his decision made. In his mind, it would be a simple lesson, not just in theory but in the unspoken rule of academia, that not everyone belongs in every room. And so, the stage was set. The students could feel something was about to happen. They straightened in their seats, pens ready, eyes darting between the professor and the mysterious guest among them. The air carried a sense of curiosity and tension, though no one could predict what would come next. All they knew was that in a hall known for its strict discipline and high standards, today's lecture already felt different. The lecture hall was quiet, filled with that tense silence that often comes when a professor is about to call on someone. Dr. Henry Carlton adjusted his glasses, his eyes narrowing as they settled on the old woman sitting calmly in the middle row. The students noticed where his attention had gone, and whispers began to float across the room. Some students nudged each other, already sensing that the professor had something in mind. After all, he had a habit of testing students in unexpected ways, but this time, it was clear that his focus was not on them, it was on her. He spoke slowly, his voice carrying a sharp edge. "You, madam," he said, pointing in her direction, "since you seem so comfortable sitting here among my students, why don't you answer this question?" His tone was polite on the surface, but underneath, it held a note of challenge, even mockery. He wanted to test her, perhaps even humiliate her, and he expected the class to enjoy the spectacle. The students turned to look at her, their eyes wide with curiosity. Some smiled nervously, while others smirked, thinking it would be entertaining to watch. They imagined she would shake her head, confused, or perhaps try to leave quietly to avoid embarrassment. The question Dr. Carlton asked was not simple. It was a complex theoretical problem that even many graduate students would hesitate to solve without preparation. He delivered it smoothly, explaining the scenario with difficult terms and layered concepts, making sure it sounded as intimidating as possible. But the old woman did not flinch. She looked at him steadily, her face calm, her hands resting lightly on her lap. For a moment, she didn't answer, and the silence grew heavier in the hall. The professor's smirk deepened as he thought she was trapped, caught in his web. He leaned slightly forward, as if savoring the moment. Then, with a quiet but firm voice, she began to speak. Her words flowed with surprising clarity, her tone free of hesitation. She repeated the question in her own way, breaking it down into simple steps that even the most confused student in the hall could understand. Then she began to solve it, line by line, idea by idea, as though she had not only studied it but lived with it for years. Her explanation was not rushed. It was calm, patient, and filled with such depth that the hall fell into complete silence. Students who had been smirking now leaned forward, their pens frozen above their notebooks. Eyes widened, and heads turned from her to the professor, then back to her. She wasn't just answering the question, she was teaching. She explained the reasoning behind each step, why the formula worked this way, and how the theory connected to real-life applications. Her voice, though soft, carried across the room with strength. Every student could hear her, and more importantly, they could understand her. She spoke with a kind of simplicity that made the hardest concepts feel almost natural. Dr. Carlton's smirk slowly faded. At first, he tried to hide his surprise, but as she continued, his eyes grew sharper. He realized she was not just giving a good answer, she was giving a brilliant one. It wasn't just correct, it was elegant. Her approach was something even he might not have thought of in that exact way. A flicker of unease passed through him. Who was this woman? How could she, a stranger, answer with such mastery? The students began to feel the weight of the moment. They knew what this meant. The professor had tried to put her in a difficult spot, expecting her to stumble, but instead, she was outshining him in his own territory. Some students exchanged glances, their expressions filled with amazement. A few even smiled, enjoying the unexpected turn of events. It was rare to see someone stand up to Dr. Carlton's challenges, and here was an elderly woman doing it with such grace that it left them speechless. When she finished, there was a pause. It was as if the air itself had stopped moving. Then a quiet ripple of awe spread through the hall. A few students couldn't help but clap softly before stopping, unsure if it was appropriate in the middle of a lecture. Others just sat there, their faces lit with respect. She, however, simply nodded and folded her hands again, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Dr. Carlton cleared his throat. He tried to regain his composure, straightening his posture, adjusting his glasses again. "Well," he said, his voice slightly strained, "that is, a fair attempt." But even as he said it, everyone could hear the lack of confidence in his tone. He knew, and the students knew, that it was not just a fair attempt, it was a flawless explanation. He had underestimated her, and now he stood exposed in front of his own class. The old woman did not respond to his half-hearted remark. She simply offered a small, kind smile, her eyes gentle, as though she had no intention of embarrassing him. Her presence carried no arrogance, no pride, only quiet wisdom. It was this calmness that unsettled him even more. She wasn't trying to win. She wasn't even trying to prove herself. She was simply sharing knowledge, naturally, effortlessly. The students could not stop thinking about her answer. Some quickly scribbled notes, trying to capture what she had said, realizing that her explanation was clearer than any they had heard before. Others sat in silence, their minds replaying her words. They felt as if they had just witnessed something rare, something that would stay with them far beyond the classroom walls. Meanwhile, Dr. Carlton's thoughts raced. He had built his career on being the smartest voice in the room, the one who always had the answers, the one who could never be caught off guard. Yet here, in his own lecture hall, an old woman had just matched him, perhaps even surpassed him. And she had done it so easily, without effort, without even seeming to care about recognition. It made him uneasy, but it also sparked a deep curiosity. Who was she really? Why was she here? And how much more did she know? As the lecture continued, the energy in the room shifted. The students were no longer focused only on the professor, they kept glancing at her, whispering quietly when they thought no one noticed. She remained silent for the rest of the time, not offering more unless asked, but her one answer had changed everything. She was no longer just an old woman sitting among students. She was something else, someone extraordinary, someone who carried knowledge that could not be measured by age or appearance. By the time the lecture ended, Dr. Carlton felt a restlessness he hadn't felt in years. He dismissed the class with his usual authority, but his voice lacked the same power it had earlier. As students filed out, many looked back at the woman, still seated calmly, her expression peaceful. Some wanted to speak to her, but they hesitated, unsure if it would be polite. Others simply left in silence, their minds buzzing with questions. The professor, however, stayed behind a moment longer, gathering his notes with unusual slowness. He could not shake the feeling that something had shifted in his world, and it all began with one answer from a woman he had thought would fail. The classroom emptied slowly after the lecture ended, but the energy inside lingered. Students walked out in groups, whispering about what they had just witnessed. Some replayed the woman's calm and perfect explanation in their minds, amazed at how she had taken such a complicated problem and turned it into something so clear. A few laughed softly, not out of mockery, but out of sheer disbelief. They couldn't believe that their strict and proud professor, Dr. Carlton, had been caught off guard by someone he had clearly underestimated. The old woman, however, did not move quickly to leave. She remained seated, as if she were in no rush, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked around the emptying hall with soft eyes, almost as if she were remembering something from long ago. A student hesitated near her row, clearly wanting to say something, but then thought better of it and hurried out the door. Dr. Carlton was gathering his papers slowly, his mind racing. He had always been the center of attention, always the sharpest mind in any lecture hall. But now he felt unsettled, as though the ground beneath his feet had shifted. He wanted to dismiss what had happened, to tell himself that it was just a lucky guess, or perhaps that she had memorized something she once read. Yet deep inside, he knew it wasn't luck. The way she had explained the concept, the ease with which she spoke, and the insight behind her words, those things came only from deep understanding, the kind of understanding he respected, even if he did not want to admit it. Still, his pride pushed him forward. He walked toward her, trying to keep his usual confident air. "Well," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the almost empty hall, "you certainly surprised my class today." He tried to make it sound casual, but there was a hint of sharpness in his tone, like he was still testing her. The old woman looked up at him and smiled kindly. "I didn't mean to surprise anyone," she replied gently. "I was only answering your question." Her calmness disarmed him. He had expected arrogance, or at least pride, but she showed neither. Instead, she seemed almost humble, as though her answer had been nothing more than a simple conversation. That bothered him even more. He cleared his throat. "And may I ask," he said, choosing his words carefully, "what brings you here? You're not one of my students, clearly." She tilted her head slightly, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "No, I'm not your student. I came because I enjoy learning. Knowledge doesn't belong only to the young, you know." Her words carried no edge, but they landed firmly in his mind. Knowledge doesn't belong only to the young. He felt a flush rise in his face but quickly pushed it down. "Yes, of course," he said stiffly. "But the material I teach is not easy. It requires years of study and training." She gave a small nod. "That's true," she said. "But sometimes years of experience and reflection can make even the most difficult ideas feel simple." Her answer unsettled him further, though he didn't show it. He wanted to know more about her, but his pride still resisted. He didn't want to appear too curious, not after what had just happened. So he gathered his notes briskly and left with a polite nod, though inside, his mind was buzzing. That night, as he sat in his study at home, Dr. Carlton found himself unable to concentrate. His thoughts kept returning to her. He had faced brilliant minds before, in debates, conferences, and research discussions. But this felt different. This wasn't just about intellect, it was about the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence that didn't demand recognition. He found himself feeling strangely humbled, though he would never admit it aloud. The next day, word about the incident spread quickly across campus. Students talked about it in the cafeteria, in the library, and in their dorms. Some described the woman as a mystery genius. Others speculated that she must have been a retired professor or perhaps even a writer of some famous book. Whatever the case, her answer had become the talk of the school. When the next lecture arrived, the room filled earlier than usual. Students were buzzing with anticipation, wondering if the old woman would return. And to their surprise, she did. She walked in calmly, taking the same seat she had the day before. Once again, whispers spread, and eyes followed her. This time, though, there was no mocking curiosity. Instead, there was respect, even admiration. Dr. Carlton entered and noticed her immediately. He felt the familiar mix of irritation and intrigue. He told himself that he would be prepared this time. If she spoke again, he would make sure to prove his authority, to remind everyone who the professor was. But deep down, a small part of him was curious to see if she truly was as knowledgeable as she seemed. As he lectured, his eyes kept drifting to her. She sat as calmly as before, listening intently, never fidgeting, never distracted. She did not take notes like the students, but it was clear she missed nothing. Her gaze was steady, almost serene, as though she was quietly measuring every word. Finally, unable to resist, Dr. Carlton decided to test her again. He presented a question that went even deeper than before, something he was sure no one in the room could answer without advanced study. He phrased it carefully, adding layers to make it as challenging as possible. Then, once again, he directed it at her. The students leaned forward, holding their breath. They had been waiting for this moment. Some thought she might stay silent, not wanting to draw attention. Others believed she would surprise them again. She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. Then she began to speak, and just like before, the room fell silent. Her explanation was even more remarkable this time. She didn't just solve the problem, she connected it to other ideas, weaving together concepts from different fields of knowledge. She used examples from history, philosophy, and even daily life, making the abstract problem come alive in ways no one had ever heard before. The students were captivated. They weren't just learning, they were inspired. They scribbled furiously in their notebooks, trying to keep up, though many simply sat and listened, afraid to miss even a single word. When she finished, the silence was heavier than before. Then, slowly, the room filled with quiet murmurs of awe. The students' faces shone with respect, and some even looked at her as though she were a legend. Dr. Carlton, however, stood frozen. He could not deny it anymore. This woman was not just knowledgeable, she was brilliant. And yet, her brilliance was not loud or boastful. It was quiet, steady, and undeniable. He felt his pride cracking, replaced by something he had not felt in years, humility. In that moment, he realized the truth. He had tried to embarrass her, but instead, she had revealed something far greater. She had reminded everyone, including him, that true genius is not bound by age, title, or appearance. It lives quietly within those who dedicate themselves to learning, not for recognition, but for the love of knowledge itself. And for the first time in many years, Dr. Carlton felt something he had forgotten, a desire to listen, to learn, and to understand more deeply than before. The lecture hall was alive with a different kind of energy now. The students were no longer coming just to hear Dr. Carlton's lectures, they were also curious to see the old woman who had surprised everyone with her brilliance. Every time she entered, the air seemed to change. Young minds whispered excitedly, their eyes following her with admiration. She, however, remained the same, calm, steady, and humble, as though she had no idea how much attention she had drawn. Dr. Carlton, on the other hand, felt a storm brewing inside him. His pride had been shaken, and although he still lectured with authority, he was far more cautious now. Each time he looked at her, he felt the weight of his own arrogance. He had set out to embarrass her, but instead, she had revealed a depth of knowledge that not only equaled his own but seemed to surpass it in certain ways. Yet what troubled him even more was her lack of pride. She never boasted, never acted superior. She simply answered questions with clarity and kindness, leaving behind silence that spoke louder than applause. One afternoon, after finishing a lecture, Dr. Carlton decided to confront the mystery. He dismissed the class and then approached her directly. The students lingered at the door, pretending to gather their things while secretly listening. His voice was formal but softer than before. "Madam," he began, "you have shown remarkable understanding in this class. I cannot help but wonder, who are you?" She smiled gently, her eyes warm. "I am nobody important," she said. "Just someone who loves to learn." The professor frowned slightly. He wasn't satisfied. "No," he pressed, "that cannot be. Your answers, they are not the words of a casual learner. They carry depth, structure, wisdom. Please, tell me more." The students leaned closer, desperate to hear. The old woman looked at him thoughtfully, then at the young faces around her. "Very well," she said softly. "If you wish to know, I will tell you." She spoke of her past, not with pride, but with simplicity. She had once been a young scholar herself, many years ago. She studied mathematics, science, and philosophy with great passion. But life had taken her down a different road. Family responsibilities, struggles, and circumstances had kept her from pursuing fame or position. She had not published books under her own name, nor stood on grand stages. Instead, she had chosen a quieter path, teaching in small community schools, guiding children who otherwise had no access to education, writing research papers that were often credited to others because she cared more about the work than recognition. The students listened in awe. To them, she was like a hidden gem, someone whose brilliance had gone unnoticed by the world but had never dimmed. She had lived through decades of change, yet her love for knowledge had never faded. Even in her old age, she still sought to learn, to sit among students, to listen, and to share when asked. Dr. Carlton felt a lump in his throat. For years, he had measured success by titles, by applause, by recognition. He had built his identity around being admired. Yet here sat a woman who had none of those things, and still, she was greater than him in the truest sense. Her humility made his pride feel small. He realized that while he had been chasing recognition, she had been quietly living the true purpose of learning. One of the students finally gathered the courage to ask, "Why did you never take credit for your work? Why didn't you become a famous professor or writer?" The woman looked at the young student with a kind smile. "Because fame was never my goal," she replied. "Knowledge is not a crown to wear. It is a gift to share. My joy came from seeing others understand, from helping minds grow. That was enough for me." The room grew quiet again, and Dr. Carlton felt the truth of her words settle deeply within him. For the first time in many years, he felt humbled not by defeat but by wisdom. He saw how narrow his view had been, how much he had missed by clinging to pride. From that day, something shifted in him. During his lectures, he no longer sought to dominate the room. He invited more questions, encouraged open discussions, and even turned to the old woman at times, asking for her perspective. At first, the students were shocked, but soon they saw a new side of their professor, a man willing to share space, to listen, and to grow. The woman never took advantage of the attention. She never interrupted or tried to take the stage. She only spoke when asked, and when she did, her words carried weight. Sometimes she shared simple wisdom drawn from daily life, other times she offered insights that made even the most complex theories feel clear. Every time she spoke, the room grew silent, not out of fear as it once did for Dr. Carlton, but out of respect. As weeks passed, the whispers about her spread beyond the lecture hall. Other professors heard about the mysterious elderly woman who sat in Carlton's class and stunned everyone with her knowledge. Some were skeptical, thinking the students exaggerated. Others grew curious. One day, a colleague of Dr. Carlton stopped by during his lecture, sitting quietly at the back. And just as before, when the old woman spoke, even the colleague was left speechless. Soon, she was no longer just a curiosity, she became an inspiration. Students began writing about her in their journals, describing how she had changed their view of learning. They admired her humility, her clarity, her love for knowledge without the need for recognition. She became a living lesson, one that no textbook could provide. For Dr. Carlton, the transformation was deeper. He began to question himself, not his knowledge, but his purpose. For so long, he had believed teaching was about proving himself, about standing above others. But the old woman had shown him that teaching was about lifting others, about making knowledge accessible, about humility in the face of truth. One evening, after class, he found himself walking beside her. The campus was quiet, the lamps glowing softly in the dusk. He hesitated before speaking. "You have changed me," he admitted quietly. "I see now that I was proud, blind even. I thought teaching was about power. But you have reminded me of what it should truly be." She looked at him with her gentle smile. "We are all learners," she said. "Even teachers. The moment we stop learning, we stop growing." Those words stayed with him. From that day, he began to approach his lectures differently. He smiled more, encouraged more, and above all, listened more. His students noticed the change, and they respected him for it. The old woman continued to come, never asking for recognition, never demanding respect. She didn't need to. She had already left her mark on every heart in that hall. And so, the truth unfolded. She was not just a visitor. She was not just an old woman in a classroom. She was a teacher of teachers, a genius hidden in plain sight, whose greatest gift was not her knowledge, but the humility with which she shared it. The weeks turned into months, and the old woman's quiet presence in Dr. Carlton's lecture hall became something of a legend on campus. She came without fail, always choosing the same seat, always listening with patience, and only speaking when invited. The students began to look forward to her words as much as the professor's lectures, and even Dr. Carlton himself found a new rhythm in teaching. He no longer stood at the front like an untouchable authority. Instead, he walked among his students, asked them questions, and listened carefully to their thoughts. He had been transformed by her example, though he never admitted it directly. The woman's identity was still a mystery to many, though whispers traveled from class to class. Some claimed she had once been a great scholar whose work had been overlooked. Others said she was a retired teacher who had chosen a life of service rather than fame. A few even believed she was simply a brilliant mind who had never been given the platform she deserved. But none of that mattered to the students. To them, she was living proof that wisdom does not fade with age, nor does genius require recognition to shine. One day, after another lecture in which the old woman offered an explanation so clear it left the entire hall in awe, a student raised her hand shyly. She looked at the professor first, then at the woman. "May I ask something?" she said softly. Dr. Carlton nodded, curious. The student turned to the woman. "Why do you come here every day? You already know so much. You could be teaching us instead of sitting among us." The hall fell silent, all eyes on her. The old woman smiled gently, her gaze sweeping across the young faces. "I come here," she said, "because learning never ends. I sit among you because knowledge belongs to everyone, professors, students, and even an old woman like me. I learn from you as much as you think you learn from me. Each question you ask, each thought you share, reminds me of the beauty of curiosity. That is why I am here." Her answer touched the students deeply. Some lowered their eyes, blinking back unexpected emotion, while others smiled, realizing the weight of her words. Even Dr. Carlton felt something stir inside him. He had spent years believing that knowledge was something to guard, something to show off. But she had shown him it was something to share freely, without pride or fear. As the semester neared its end, the day of the final lecture arrived. The room was packed beyond capacity. Students who were not even enrolled in the class had come, simply to witness the experience of learning in that hall. Professors from other departments quietly slipped in as well, curious about the woman who had become a quiet inspiration to so many. The atmosphere was electric, filled with respect, anticipation, and even a touch of reverence. Dr. Carlton stood at the front, looking out at the sea of faces. But this time, he didn't feel the need to prove himself. He began his lecture with humility, weaving together ideas not just from his notes, but from the discussions that had taken place throughout the semester. His words carried a different weight now, not because they were complicated, but because they came from a place of sincerity. And when he finished, instead of closing his book and dismissing the class as he usually did, he turned to the old woman. "Would you do us the honor," he said quietly, his voice filled with respect, "of sharing some final words with us today?" The students erupted in murmurs of approval, their eyes bright with excitement. The old woman hesitated for a moment, then slowly stood. The room fell silent at once. She looked around, her kind gaze resting on each face as though she saw every student individually. Then she began to speak. She talked about her life, not in great detail, but enough to reveal her heart. She spoke of her love for books as a child, of how she had spent nights reading by candlelight when the world was asleep. She shared how she had once dreamed of being a professor herself but had chosen a different path when her family needed her. She told them that she had never regretted that choice because teaching children in small villages had given her joy greater than any award could bring. She reminded them that true intelligence was not measured by titles, diplomas, or wealth, but by curiosity, kindness, and the willingness to keep learning no matter one's age. She told them that humility was the highest form of wisdom and that respect for others was the foundation of true knowledge. Her words flowed like a gentle stream, simple yet powerful. The students leaned in, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles of admiration. Even the professors who had come to observe sat still, humbled by her quiet strength. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, not the casual clapping of appreciation, but the deep, heartfelt applause that comes when people know they have witnessed something unforgettable. Some students stood to their feet, clapping with tears streaming down their faces. Others simply bowed their heads in respect. Dr. Carlton himself clapped the loudest, his eyes moist, his pride finally giving way to gratitude. For the first time in his long career, he felt like a student again, eager to learn, ready to grow. The old woman smiled softly, bowed her head slightly, and then sat down again, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To her, it was just another day of sharing what she loved most. In the days that followed, she did not return to the lecture hall. Some students looked for her, waiting for her familiar presence, but she never came again. Perhaps she felt her work was done, or perhaps she simply moved on to another place where her wisdom was needed. No one knew for sure. But her absence only deepened her impact. She became a story passed down from class to class, a memory that lingered in the walls of that hall. Dr. Carlton never forgot her. He often spoke of her in his future lectures, not by name, but as the wise woman who reminded me what it means to truly learn. His teaching style remained changed forever. He became more approachable, more understanding, and more patient. His students noticed the difference, and they admired him more than ever, not because he was untouchable, but because he was human. Years later, when students recalled their time at Harvard, they did not speak only of the sharp lectures of Dr. Carlton. They spoke of the mysterious old woman who sat quietly among them, who turned the proudest professor into a humble learner, and who taught them all that genius does not need recognition to shine. Her story lived on as a legend, a reminder that wisdom can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest teacher in the room is not the one standing at the front, but the one sitting quietly in the middle, waiting to share when the time is right. And so, the story of the old woman ended not with fame or applause, but with something far greater, a lasting impact on countless young minds, and a humbled professor who finally understood that the true purpose of knowledge is not to glorify oneself, but to light the way for others.